anticipated, but it was an enjoyable experience. So my husband was telling me that right before I hopped on here, it's funny because he was like, "Oh, you do this, like it's, this is going to be fun for you." And I said, "Yeah, yes." And he goes, you stand up on stages and it's no big deal." I was like, "Well, that was a 6-month process to get there. And it's not something that I just wake up and like, okay, now I'm just going to go and deliver a message." But it was fun. It was a great experience. Definitely don't regret it. It was intense, but it was fun.
Intensely amazing, right? So TEDx,
yes.
You mentioned there's a big process that goes on behind the scenes that people may not be aware of.
That's
and
right.
Then they provide you with a coach to help you get on that stage and do well and know the dynamics. That's awesome. And yes, it is very different being in these interviews too, because in TEDx, you get to see eyeballs, you get to see reactions. The interview helps with that process. But if I'm doing like a point and shoot with my computer, at the end of the day, I'm staring at this little like robot thing and trying to figure out, all right, how do I emotionally interact with an arbitrary object in my room? That's a very different game than being on stage at TEDx. So where did you do your TEDx talk?
It was in Wisconsin. So actually very far from home. I was living in Dallas at the time. And so I had to travel up there to Wisconsin to do it. But it was fun.
That's awesome. Okay. And that's The Pursuit of Happiness in the Workplace for those who are listening. You can go check that out. And then below, you'll also see for the happiness formula cheat sheet is available and prepared for you. So those are a couple of resources. We'll take some extras. Why not? In addition to that, Sharissa, what 3 resources do you recommend for entrepreneurs and visionaries out there?
Oh, that's such a great question. I love that question because anytime I hear somebody else ask the question, I'm always taking notes. Like, what is it? And I am an avid learner. So anything I can get my hands on, I'm always, I always love to learn. So I love that you asked me that question. So I have a long list, but in the interest of time and to keep it concise, basically anything by Simon Sinek. So when it comes to servant leadership and just putting people at the center of leadership in general, I think Simon Sinek is by far one of my favorite thought leaders in that space. And then also The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer is one of my favorite books. It is incredible. And it talks so much about just trusting the process, leaning in and taking those steps of faith, even when you don't know the full picture, and being able to just surrender and just, show up as the best version of yourself and take those risks that are often needed in leadership without having to worry about, exactly how everything is going to play out. So definitely The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer, anything pretty much by Simon Sinek. So he has a couple of really good books. Leaders Eat Last is one of them. Start with Why is another big one. So yeah, those are the ones I definitely recommend. And then the third recommendation, well, actually, this is just something that I personally use just because servant leadership is so much based on like biblical principles, right? So for me, it's the Bible. I lean very heavily into, okay, what does God say about servant leadership and how do we model that in a way that gives us that insight and wisdom, because at the end of the day, all of it comes from him. So
yes, you nailed it. You might be the second person out of 200 to reference the good book.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And it surprises
me. I have to be honest.
So
that is by far my number one. Let's just put it that way. I know I didn't say it in that order, but
I hear you.
By far my number one.
And I think so many of us take that for granted, right? We want to give new resources, right? So we don't tend to say that how important 2 + 2 is to us for our lives. And then we forget though that other people maybe haven't considered reading it before. Or looking at it. And same thing with something like Simon Sinek, Start With Why. I mean, that book's so good. I got it twice.
Oh, look at that.
So, these are very important books. And I'll double down with you on another one that this guy, like the Bible. Yes, 100%. Other religious faith books, Book of Mormon, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but I've been reading this one, the Bhagavad Gita, well. And, I've always been fascinated with world religions and different perspectives around the same truths and how people come to know and understand our greater purpose in this life. So thank you for diving into that resource. And I hope those who are listening in realize that we make time for what we want to make time for, just like you made time for this podcast. I highly recommend also checking out the good book that Sharissa mentioned. So we'll be right back. We're going to dive into supporting introverted servant leaders to create happiness in the workplace. And whether they are the founder or not, if you're building a team, you're going to have introverts on your team. So how do you make space for them? How do you create a culture and an environment where those people are protected, where they're appreciated, where results are also cultivated? All of that will be valuable, and we'll also dive into Sharissa's vision. So we'll see you guys on the other side. All right, welcome in to Vision Pros Live with Jackson Callum. I'm your show host. We will be doing interviews for visionary entrepreneurs and guest leaders who are building fantastic visions out there. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Vision Pros Live. I'm your show host, Jackson Callum, founder and CEO of First Class Business, and I am super stoked to have Sharissa Deppen on the show today of Leadership Mastery Alliance. You can find that at leadershipmasteryalliance.com. Now, Sharissa is a CEO. She's also a TEDx and award-winning international keynote speaker. She's in leadership and executive coach for corporate leaders, Forbes, and the Huffington Post writer, Forbes Coaches Council member, University of South Florida advisory board member, and professor at Southeastern University. She has some depth, let me tell you, and a podcast in addition to all of that. So she sleeps somewhere in there, I'm pretty certain. But that said, we're going to be taking advantage of all the time we can to find out about her vision and her best leadership and worst leadership experiences. Before we do that, though, I've got a few more resources for you. So today, you've been fed much in terms of value. We're going to keep going. Melissa Gray of the Law Spot. She was also a guest on the show. Somebody who I almost canceled her show because I'm not a big fan of lawyers, to be honest with you. That said, she has this message: law doesn't have to be complicated. I found myself talking to a human being who happens to be a lawyer, somebody who could relate to me, somebody who understood where my business needs are and really where your business needs likely are too. And she's bridging the gap between the LegalZoom templates that are good and helpful for starting to understand a foundation and that really awkward relationship with a general counsel that you don't really get along with, but you need. I've found her to be a breath of fresh air. We're now strategic partners as well as our ventures continue to grow and thrive. And then there's Andrew Sosin of Recovery Unplugged. He is not a strategic partner. He's not a client. He doesn't pay for this spot. I think it's very important for everybody to know. I put resources as sponsors that I really believe in and I really want to help people with. So Recovery Unplugged is actually an addiction recovery program, and all of us are touched by addiction, whether it's ourselves or whether it's our family members or friends. We know somebody who is struggling to really feel like they belong. I really like the way that Andrew goes about his leadership. He's been to Tony Robbins' program 22 years in a row. In addition to that, he has over 400 employees. He talks very highly of his team, his executive team members. Several of them have overcome addictions and moved into a position where they now are executives and have high functional families. And if you knew their background stories, you might be surprised and shocked that they were able to pull that transition off. Once again, that highlights to me the nature of the leader, as well as the nature to create amazing products, services, solutions to help people advance. With COVID, they had 5 physical locations. They might have had 4 at the time that were shut down, and they had to figure out how to bring this asset online into a virtual community. That gets me excited because that's how we are going to go about helping the 8 billion people in this world. And so if you have a chance to use that and you need it, or you know somebody who does, you don't know necessarily how to help them, use their 24/7 hotline to get some advice. It might change yours or their life. Now, I also want to talk about the water project. Here I am as a podcaster going a little bit chap, and my water bottle is kind of empty right now. I have never been without, though. And so I refuse to forget about the needs of those who have greater needs than myself. I can go downstairs and get a new glass of water right now if I want to. And there's millions of people who don't have access to that. I love what the Water Project is up to see these kids and how much gratitude they have for water, as well as these communities, to know that the money that I put into these projects, I literally get to see the outcome of what happens. It's kind of like crowdfunding. You invest in a specific community, you get to see how many people you're helping and affecting. You get to see what type of project they're building even. And if you just contribute a little bit, you get to see the outcome. I see these kids celebrating water like my kids celebrate Christmas Day. And that simultaneously breaks my heart, but also makes me want to do more to help out. So if you're in a financial position to help out with this, definitely contribute to the Water Project. If you're not in a financial position to help out, maybe just share this with somebody that you think might be inspired by the activity itself. In addition to that, if there is something near and dear to your heart, a cause that you want to see us talk about and promote, then don't hesitate to drop it in the comments, because we can give abundantly when we are in a position to do so. And I'd be rock the mic about it if it's aligned with our values and virtues, and possibly even contribute to it myself. So thank you for that. Let's go serve and help the 8 billion people who need it. Without further ado, Sharissa Deppen, welcome to Vision Pros Live. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jackson. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So diving into our first question, what is the vision you have for those that you serve?
Well, basically, if I could sum it up, and there's so much more to this, so it's always hard for me to answer the vision question because there's so many different aspects of it. But if I could summarize it, it would be to help as many introverted servant leaders in the world thrive in their career, really enjoy their lives even outside of work, and this means helping them have the impact and the influence that they want to have while functioning in their zone of genius, what I call their leadership zone of genius, as an introverted servant leader, taking care of themselves in the process and being intentional on their personal and professional goals and aspirations. So that's really my vision and my hope for the work that I do.
Awesome. I love it. So does the speed and articulation with which you speak with, is that a reflection of just the inherent Jordan Peterson within you that can bring amazing brilliance to the world super fast? Or is there a combination of that combined with an introvert? Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Yes, I consider myself for sure an introvert. And then I go based on the definition that introverts get their energy from, being by themselves and all of that. So it doesn't mean that I don't love interacting with people. This is one of my favorite things to do, just having conversations like this, with like-minded people. And honestly, a lot of the passion and even sometimes the speed at which I talk comes from that place of passion of, I just feel so aligned with the work that I do. I'm so blessed to be able to do this and get the message out there to help as many people as I possibly can, as many introverted servant leaders.
I'm all for it. I love it. I love it 100%. I was delivering a capacitation or a training to a real estate team once, and this guy had the audacity to step in and go, "How much coffee did you drink this morning?" I was like, "Brother, I don't need coffee. I just need an apple and I'm good to go. Let's hit it." He was like, "Oh,"
exactly.
like, he wasn't expecting, but I was like, if you want me to slow down, like I want you to listen faster. Well, let's try to find our happy medium a little bit so we can speed up our listening too. So I love it. What's your vision for you?
So for me personally, my goal is always to be able to use the gifts, the talents and the experiences that God has given me to serve my audience, wherever that might be, these introverted servant leaders, in the best way possible. So bring all that I can to the table to be able to help as many women specifically, because my main primarily who I serve is women in servant leadership, although I do have male clients as well. But it's just to be able to use those gifts, talents, and experience to be able to just have an impact and help them out as much as possible, both through my own personal journey as well as through well over like hundreds of people at this point that I've coached over the last 10 years. So it's such a privilege and honor for me to be trusted as somebody's coach, and then to be able to take all of that experience and help even more people is just a gift. So
absolutely. What about personal experiences on your vision? So not to derail or to dismiss the fact that you 100% are locked in with your purpose, but are there any other aspects of life or dynamics you plan on going from TEDx to launching a documentary on Netflix, Tony Robbins style?
That's funny. And it's funny because my prayer is always that whatever message that I have or whatever I have to give goes out into whatever platform it is, whatever way it's meant to go out there. So I am open. In fact, when I did the TED Talk, never in a million years was it my ambition, or I didn't even have, the TEDx talk on my vision board or anything like that at all. Never expected to do that. But I just felt drawn to it. Like the more I thought about the message that I felt so passionately about how I wanted to help people and what I was there to, to share. And I just basically prayed. I was like, okay, Lord, you put this on whatever stage, whatever platform, however this is meant to go out. And it actually started by writing. I started to write out that message on the pursuit of happiness. And then I got this idea. I got inspired to apply to TEDx. And that's where that happened. So when you talked about Netflix, I was like, oh my goodness, who knows, right? Who knows what God has in store? But I'm open to however that plays out.
I love that. I appreciate the fact that you started that topic too with my prayer is. Right. It shows just how dedicated you are to aligning your will with his and being willing to receive advice, that comes from that additional source. So we're going to shift gears completely, though. We're going to go into a dark subject. What is the worst leadership experience that you've ever had?
Oh, yeah, this was a really tough one for me. So way back when I was working in the corporate space and I was in leadership in corporate, and I had a manager that I reported, so a leader that I reported to, and she was notorious for just not treating people with a lot of respect, being really short, and just people just didn't like being around her in general. And so I was in this position where I was like, okay, I report to her. So obviously, I want to do the best that I can to be a good employee and a good leader of hers, not leader, but a team member of hers. But I also need to work with my team and protect them from a lot of what they were feeling from her. And so it kind of put me in in this place of like, okay, what do I do here? And so one of the things I leaned into, which honestly did not come naturally for me at the time, because I was, as an introverted servant leader myself, I care a lot about how people are treated. So anytime somebody is not treated with what I consider respect, it gets me riled up. Like I don't like it. And so I had to really take a step back and be intentional and pray through that and go, okay, what is my role here? What is it that I'm supposed to do? And the interesting thing is that actually led me into empathy for her. Like we actually had a business trip. And so I was working for a UK company at the time. And so I had a business trip with her. And truth be told, at the time when I found out about this, I was like, I cannot imagine being like sitting next to her on a plane and then spending all this time with her. I don't know how this is going to go. But having said that, though, that was such a beautiful opportunity for me to lean into empathy, because, of course, we had many hours outside of, working hours and things like that we spent together as we traveled and did our work. And she opened up to me. She shared about her story. She shared about her background. And so much started to make sense. I was like, oh, my goodness, it makes sense now why she shows up in this way. And she feels like she has to be defensive and things like that, just based on little things that she shared about herself, made me have so much more empathy. So literally when we got back, we got back home, I got back into the office, and every single day I would go in with the intention of, how can I serve her? How can I be there for her, to support her, no matter what how her reaction is. And so that's kind of that's what I went in with. And over time, that relationship started to change. Not only that, but even the way she interacted with my team started to shift and change. And so it was just like miraculous. I don't know how any of that happened. And I definitely don't take credit for it. But that's another thing that I learned from that experience, that I share with my audience, that I talk about on the podcast, is how powerful empathy can be, how powerful it can be to take a step back, to give the other person the benefit of the doubt, to lead with curiosity rather than assumptions and interpretations and all of those things. So that taught me a big lesson that now, in hindsight, of course, I can be grateful for. But in the moment, it was really tough going to work, because I used to honestly just sit in my car. I talk about this in the TED Talk. I used to sit in my car for almost an hour sometimes, because I used to dread going into the office. I hated it that much. But it all shifted when I started to learn more about how to have empathy in these situations. And yeah, that changed everything. And so I'm just blessed now to be able to share that with other people and hopefully help, other people through those kinds of situations. Not that I'm saying that you need to stay in a situation if you have a really toxic work environment, but it's just another perspective to have that could really help in that moment.
Choices, right?
Yeah.
Freedom to be able to choose which direction we get is what we're empowered with on that. So one, I'm actually going to reflect credit back to you on that as the facilitator. You said you not took credit for it, and maybe not solo credit, but you did have the opportunity to be the person who got to sit next to her on that plane, right? And learn certain things about that reality. You took certain actions that empowered your faith. And, that process reminds me of some of the best managers in the world, and they're often overlooked by society, and that is parents, especially mothers. I've heard many times that one of the best things you can do with a child that you are struggling to relate to, who doesn't want to listen. Think of this child, by the way, like an employee, that employee who's you just can't get through to him. You can't figure out how to talk to them. And the easiest thing to do is to fire them. It's also one of the most costly things that you can do. Mothers can't fire their children and don't want to. So no matter how hard it is, they're going to try. But a long car ride, right? Picking an event to do somewhere where you have that time for them to open up is one of the best ways to get somebody who's not on the same page with you to open enough and talk enough about how to move that relationship forward. So that's cool that you guys
I love that.
have that opportunity.
Yeah.
I've seen that work and help in many, many regards. Let's move into the top end, the top echelon factors of leadership. What's the best leadership experience you've ever had?
Oh, you're probably going to laugh because this is so simple, yet it made the biggest impact, as far as a leadership experience that I've had. So I used to have a leader, a boss, many, many years ago, well over a decade now, but we used to, we worked together in a team of, I think there were 5 of us who reported to him. And it wasn't always easy. Like there were a lot of things that were very stressful in that environment and things like that. But the one thing that stood out to me about him is he really took the time to get to know each of his team members, even on a personal level. He knew like what we liked. He knew about our kids. He knew, what was going on with us and our family, because he would always check in. What did you guys do on the weekend? How was this? And if we shared something that was going on in our personal life, he would remember and then follow up on it and follow up with us on it. And that just meant so much to me. And the one thing that I will never forget, and it sounds so silly, but this one thing that he did for me, actually for my daughter, it wasn't even for me. And at the time I was a single mom. And so I went into work one day and it was around the, Halloween. And he just happened to ask me like in passing, oh, what are you guys doing for Halloween? And so I told him, what our plans were. And he's like, oh, what is your daughter's favorite candy? And I told him, and of course, I'm not thinking anything of it. And I just kind of let it go. And a few days later, I have this huge bag of candy sitting at my desk. I was like, oh my goodness. And this has been well over a decade now. And that is the one story. When you asked me what is my best leadership experience, that is the first thing that came to mind. It's those little things. And that's one of the things that I love to share with other people, because sometimes we have this grand idea like of how you need to be perfect in all of these areas as a leader, when really it's in the little tiny things, right? It's remembering things about people and treating them as whole people rather than segmenting out into like, oh, I have to lead them in this workspace, but really thinking about how can I make a difference in their lives, as in their lives as whole humans rather than just employees. And so little things make the biggest difference. And I'm going to give you another little, I know you asked me for, I think it was 3 resources at the beginning, but I'll add another one because I think this really helps, to what I was just saying. And Gary Chapman, so many people know Gary Chapman from the 5 love languages. So he wrote the, what is it called? The 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. So I highly recommend that book because it helps you like tune in with like everyone is different, right? So some people like to receive appreciation verbally. Some people prefer it in private versus in public. So there's so many different elements to that. But when you know your team and you know how they like to receive that appreciation, it can make all the difference, because something as small as a bit of, like a piece of candy or a bag of candy on somebody's desk can really just, stay with them for the rest of their lives and inspire them. And so actually funny end to that story. He was actually at my wedding 2 years ago. I invited him to my wedding and he showed up in South Africa. Woo! He flew all the way to South Africa to be at my wedding.
Whoa. Yes. That's awesome. That's amazing.
Those are the kind of leaders that I will never forget. He made such a big impression on me. Yeah.
Well, it's the dedication to the relationship,
Absolutely.
Beyond the means to an end. Right. I absolutely love that. Matt Lytle, I got to give big credit to him. He worked as part of my team, and he recently came to visit me from Canada. He came to Texas and he went to San Antonio, and him and his he invited me to go out to the Riverwalk with them. And I got there and Matt had cookies for me. One, he bought local cookies that were like massive. He remembered that I like cookies, right? It's 2 big old things of these cookies. And then he had a bag too, a gift bag. I'm like, what? Like something else. And I open up and it's got a mug. And on one side of it, it's got First Class Business. And the other side, it's got Vision Pros. And like just, wow, like how thoughtful. Like the extreme nature of the thoughtfulness. He'll always be a brother to me. He'll always be a mentor. Even though he worked for me, he has taught me so much about leadership. That it's awesome to have people like that in your life. And who intentionally, it's not hard to do that. You just have to care enough about the other person to think through What can I do to be there for this person in a simple way? So
Yeah.
moving into the next question, this is, I would say, the hardest question that we ask. It should be, which is, if this were the last chance you had to share, a lesson with visionaries and entrepreneurs, leaders, what powerful lesson can other visionaries learn from your experience?
I think I would go back. My first instinct is to go back to the book of Simon Sinek's, like Start With Why, but really just the concept of that. Really know your why. Know the purpose behind what you're doing, why you have that position that you have, why you're in that industry that you are, whatever the case may be. But know your drive. Like, what is your? I guess another way to put that is your intrinsic motivation, right? What's going to keep you going and help you to serve and help you to have that impact and influence that you want to have, no matter what the circumstance, no matter how tough things get. Really understand your why behind why you do what you do, because with that you're unstoppable. Like, once you can align with that and really get not even it's just a clarity, right? So get clarity on the direction that you need to go that aligns with that why, you become absolutely unstoppable. Because then at the other side of that, at the other side of fear, is really you fulfilling that purpose. So I think clarity on your why, and just having that reason. And for me, I'll tell you about it just from my own experience. And this goes back to the TED Talk. I was absolutely petrified to get on that stage, no matter how much, I did so much preparation leading up to that, but still, like, it's live. You have one shot. And
I'd be terrified. I haven't done it. I'm going to at some point, but I'm terrified.
That's incredible. I love it. But yeah, so I was extremely nervous and extremely, I was frozen, like, honestly, standing backstage. And it was funny because there was a guy standing at the door to the entrance of the stage, and probably on purpose, because I don't know whether they thought somebody was going to be a flight risk and just like run off the stage. But it was. Right. But he was standing guard at the door. And I'm sitting there, absolutely standing there, frozen, and I was about to go on next. And I just remember he made eye contact with me. We locked eyes, and he goes, "That way, like, that way. Don't even think about getting up." And so as I was walking up on the stage, I was praying about it, but also I just kept focused on, if this message helps me to reach one person, in this audience or later on or whatever it is, it's worth it. I'm going to get over my fear, and I'm going to stand up there. I'm going to focus on the message. I'm going to focus on doing the very best I can to add value, and the rest is going to be up to God. So that's where that why came in for me. My reasoning was, if it can help just one person, I'm going to get up and I'm going to fight no matter what. I'm going to get over myself and my own fears and insecurities, and I'm going to go and do it. And that's very much in line with even just the work that I do today. Because this is, as an introvert, I'd be, sitting here just typing up and writing articles and doing those kinds of things. I wouldn't necessarily, this is not my first inclination to just go and speak out there. But it's my passion that drives me. It's my why that drives me. And now I just love it. I mean, the more I do this, the more I really enjoy it. So thank you for asking. That's a great question.
Absolutely. And I love that you unapologetically talk about prayer as a part of the process so much. It is, meditation. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, they're very similar superpowers. And sometimes we get lost in the semantics. We gravitate away from things that we don't like. But at the end of the day, meditation, prayer, intentional thinking, pondering, there's lots of ways it can be put, but it's so clear that that's one of your superpowers for making sure that you're ready to deliver those experiences at your best. And you mentioned this idea of intrinsic motivation. What does that mean for, I know it means to be with your why and to recognize your why, but how do you define intrinsic motivation?
Oh, great. I love that you asked us. So one way to think about it, I guess the simplest way I could describe it is, if you think about external motivation, that can be things like a promotion or a raise or benefits or things like that, things that you're going to, receive for whatever the work that, the work that you're doing. Whereas intrinsic motivation is more about your internal drive. So it's that why, right? It's your passion. What is fueling that passion? What is it that is internally motivating you to go out there and to do the work that you're doing every single day? So it's that internal motivation versus like external, motivation of like things that are, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying, that there's anything wrong with external motivation. But to me, that's some of the, the main differences between intrinsic versus extrinsic. And they're both.
You're adding horsepower, to very much when you leverage both. There's an opportunity to appreciate both, and you just highlighted that for us. So once again, I appreciate that. All right, so supporting introverted servant leaders to create happiness in the workplace. Let's dive into that. We've got plenty of extra time to dive into it. I don't want to ask you any leading questions, because my leading questions come from a position of not knowing your depth. Considering your depth, what's the best question we can go towards relating to help people unpack this as much as possible right now, or as profoundly as possible? Introverted leaders creating happiness. Why does it matter? Who would be impacted by this? I'm going to stop brainstorming for a second, turn the mic over, and just let you go, and you can talk for however you want, however long you want.
Okay, fantastic. Well, stop me at any point if you have any questions, or if you want to steer the conversation in a different direction. But one of the things I actually want to go back to, Jackson, is you mentioned this word a couple of times as you were speaking, and I love this word. And you talked about intentionality. And I think that also goes to kind of touching on some of the areas that you just mentioned, because no matter what type of leader you are, right, it's so important to be intentional about how you want to show up, be intentional about the leader that you want to be. And that's why with many of my clients, that's usually the point that I start. Like, who do you want to be as a leader? Because they talk a lot about, like professional branding and that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, so who are you and who do you want to be as a leader? And then we kind of work into, okay, so based on what you described, even thinking about leaders that you admire and things like that, based on what you described, where are you in that process, right? Where do you feel like you need a little bit extra help or support? And where do you feel like you do this really well? And then building in strengths to that, and what I call your leadership zone of genius. So within like my coaching program, what I do is I walk my clients to what I call your leadership zone of genius, so they really can understand who they are, how they were wired, like how God made them and created them to be, and what are their strengths, and what are the things they're passionate about, what are they interested about, what big challenges do they feel really strongly that they want to contribute to and help to solve, and different things like that. There's a whole process behind that, but that gets them really, really aligned, including their values. What are the things that they really believe in, and it's how do they make decisions even from that place of being just completely who they are, and who completely authentic, completely in integrity. And once you're there, like once they understand who they are and how they're wired, oh my goodness, it's like light bulbs just start going off. It's like, oh, that's why I do this in a certain way, or that's why I tend to be drawn to this certain group of people, or this cause, or things like that. It just makes the picture so much clearer. And then it also makes it clearer as far as like, okay, now where do you go? How do you take this into the world as like your gift to the world, and what you want to bring to your team, bring to the business, bring to other people, even outside of that, and in your personal life. So that's kind of if I could describe that whole process of like supporting and helping these introverted leaders really shine, it does start with that. It starts with their why, their passion, how they're wired. And then everything just comes from there, right? Their decisions, how they make decisions, how they interact with people, from that place of just being so grounded in who they are, and also who they want to be as a leader. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it does. It's huge. Now, I would venture to say that it's probably more than 90%, maybe more than 99% of people who need to slow down. And who need the space to be able to think through those dynamics. It's like values. Everybody has values, and it's like, oh my, we have a long way to go with you. Like the person who doesn't even understand the value of having that conversation. It's like, whoa. So that's there, and you have those superpowers to do that. I want to open the door for the 1 to 10% to go down that rabbit hole even further. So we know our why. We know our value. We know the values we want to build around. We have our healthy boundaries in place and set up. What do we help? How do we help those introverted leaders create happiness in the workplace?
Oh, yeah, that's a really great question.
They're ready. I think they're ready to do it, but they don't know how.
Yes. And in this case, I'm also speaking to extroverted leaders, right? Both introverted and extroverted. Because if we're thinking about how do we help our introverts, it's not just one or the other, it's both, right? That we need to come together and really understand who our introverted leaders are, how to identify them, how to meet them where they are, and how to give them those opportunities to truly shine. And a big part of that is just understanding introverts, right? And how we function, and also and we don't ever want to I want to caveat this by saying we don't ever want to put anyone in a box either, right? And kind of call them out and things like that. We want to give them an opportunity to really describe to us what it is that they need and how they see themselves, what works for them, what doesn't. But I will say there's a couple of things that I've noticed when it comes to introverts that really make a difference. So typically, and again, I'm going to generalize here, so bear with me. But typically speaking, introverts tend to like to plan and to think, right? They like to really internally process whatever it is that's going on, whether it's a decision that they need to make, whether it's a presentation that they're going to do, or whatever the case may be. So they like to be prepared for that, right? They like to have the input that they feel like they need in order to show up at their best, be prepared, and be able to, to answer questions or do whatever it is that they're being called to do. And so I would say for introverted and extroverted leaders, if you have introverts in your team, just be very mindful of that, so that when you invite them to a meeting or when you're expecting something of them, you're very clear on the expectation. You're supporting them in the best way possible. You're giving them what they need to be successful, and you're giving them enough time to be able to internally process whatever it is that they need to be able to actually do the work to the standard that they believe they need in order to move forward. So that's the one thing. So do you have any questions on that? Because I could keep going.
I think the biggest question I have, you've nailed some aspects of self-identification on that are super helpful. You haven't said anything that's not helpful. I was like, and I'm writing notes too, by the way. So that makes it a little hard to keep up sometimes. But the big thing I just circled and put a question mark next to right now was kind of the happiness factor.
Yes.
Right. So how do you go about intentionally guiding them towards happiness? And what do we want to go down the path of exploring why that's important, and who that's important to, or do we want to go towards the application of here's the steps to creating happiness in the workplace? Your call.
Yeah, I can totally touch on both. So we'll start with the why, because that's a little bit more straightforward. So there's so many studies, and we have so many benefits in this day and age, because there've been so much research done, right, as far as happiness in the workplace and how that impacts not just how people feel, their well-being, their longevity, but also productivity, right? There's a huge benefit to companies to paying attention to creating an environment where people can thrive and they're really happy and they have what they need and they feel supported, they feel psychologically safe, and all of those things to show up as themselves. And so there's already a ton of research. So I won't go into all of that, but there's a ton of research as far as why that is helpful. And if anyone wants to reach out to me and to learn more about that, please feel free, because I did a ton of research on this for the TED Talk as well. So let me know. But I will say just one thing: like, we spend over 90,000 hours of our life at work, right? So it obviously impacts how we feel. So if we're in a situation where it's just kind of sucking the life out of us, then we're probably not going to be that happy, because we're spending the majority of our time in an environment that might not be right for us. So I would definitely just suggest, getting some help and support to navigate that. But outside of that, going back to like practical steps. So what I would suggest when it comes to happiness in the workplace is having a conversation with, because introverts like that one-on-one interaction as well. They will typically open up a lot more when it comes to a one-on-one interaction versus in a team setting, unless you have created a really psychologically safe team environment where they feel comfortable, to express themselves and to open up, or they've been working with the team maybe for an extended period of time, and they have that comfort level to let you know what matters to them, right? What's important to them. Otherwise, I would suggest just starting off in a one-on-one setting and asking some really impactful questions. So asking, what motivates you? Why do you show up at work every day? What are some things that you really love about what you do versus things that you don't? What do we not offer right now, right? As a company, as a group, what do we not offer that you think would really make you happy, that would really make you feel fulfilled at your work? So there's so many different ways, and I work with my clients a lot on this to help them to create that environment and an atmosphere where people feel safe, where they feel like they can thrive, where they feel really happy and connected with not just their team members, but with the work they're doing, and in terms of how they're being led. The other thing I would suggest is there's so many different tools out there that you can use to kind of tap into this and to ask them some really good questions about what is it that drives them and in their work, and what could create a really good workspace. Another exercise that just comes to mind as well is in terms of the team dynamic. It's so important for the team and that level to be aligned on their values and what they stand for, because that helps a lot with, like minimizing conflict and conflict resolution, all of that. Because when the team knows, okay, these are the things that we stand for, here's how we act out what our values are and our vision is and all of that. It just makes it so much. They feel like they're all on the same page. They feel like they're empowered to work together as a cohesive team. But it also helps in the tough times, right? When there's conflict, when there's struggles, to say, okay, what are our values? How do we act in line with that? So that your introverts especially know what to expect, because they're the type of people that want to know what to expect, right? They don't like to be blindsided. They don't like to be put on the spot typically. Again, I'm generalizing here. But generally speaking, they like to have that North Star. They like to know, okay, what are we moving towards? What is this vision? What is the purpose? And how does my work add value? How does what I do? And that's for everyone. We all want our work to matter, right? So finding ways that your work matters can really make a difference. And then just tapping into what would make a perfect work environment for you, what would make a perfect team environment for you, what would, tell me about your favorite leader that you've had in the past, or that your favorite leader that you've seen, in that capacity. And so the questions like that can really help open people up and help them to, and also to know, like for them to know that their leader cares enough to ask them these questions makes a big difference. And also going back to the book, right? So what are your, how do you like to be appreciated? Things like that. So, and it's an ongoing conversation. It's not a one-off, but it's also observing. As a leader, you definitely have to be able to observe and be intentional about how you engage with your team, because they're going to show you so much just how they interact versus their words. So that was a lot, but hopefully that made sense.
But it gave me plenty of things to work on in a great way. I noticed as you talked about that 90% of the time is spent at work, I was realizing and thinking through, like, man, that makes it my responsibility as a founder to make sure that we're paying attention to that environment. That we're making sure that the people who are here have the opportunity to exercise that time in a way where they know they're appreciated. They know that, we want to know they're contributing and doing things that are important. And as I mentioned, that appreciation factor of like, okay, if you're going to spend that much time of your life under my roof, then I should probably take interest to figure out. And you nailed the questions. What motivates you? What do you like doing? What do we not offer, and what drives you in the work? I'm like, okay, I can ask ChatGPT as well for other examples of questions I can ask to gauge happiness in the workplace. Or there's so many tools at our disposal to take that application and then implement it with the team, right? At an individual level, as well as at a group level, to discuss it. That can be dangerous in a toxic environment. I'll leave that where it's at. That's why it's so helpful to bring somebody like Sharissa in to make sure that you're not trying to mediate a situation where you may have created a hellhole of a work environment. That takes some serious strategy to figure out how do we dig ourselves out of that pit. But as leaders, we can always be doing more. In terms of the podcast, do you bring guests on your show, or is it a solo show?
I do. So actually the podcast just started, let's see, I think we're in episode about 20, somewhere in there. So my goal was to go through and the first 100 episodes, because it's a fairly new podcast. I just started this a few months ago. And so my goal was to do solo episodes for the first 100 episodes and then introduce guests. So I've already informally had guest interviews in the past that I'm going to incorporate in. But after we hit
what's the name?
It's the Introverted Servant Leader.
The Introverted Servant Leader. Okay, we want to put that in the action steps as well, the show notes as well. Fantastic. This has been fantastic. So the thing that both of us obviously recommend based on the resources we've given, the theme that I've seen so many great leaders gravitate towards is they don't gravitate towards the book or as much as they gravitate towards the source of the book. If I want to learn about being an effective executive, then talking to Peter Drucker or somebody who works directly with him, talking to Simon Sinek, right, and going into his programs versus just the resource is really where the depth is. And we hope you have the opportunity, if you're listening, this resonated with you, to reach out to Sharissa and find out what's it like to work with her, what's it like to be part of Leadership Mastery Alliance, and what more can you get out of it if you're in these situations where it makes sense to level up the culture or escape, a bad culture that you may or may not be at fault of creating. Then definitely reach out, and we'll have those in the action notes. Now, we'll also have one more call to action on that page. And in the top right corner, it says, be our guest. If you have a vision and you're a leader and you're trying to make a difference in people's lives, then apply for the show. Come in and get to know us. Share what your vision is with us. We'll be happy to put you on stage. We want to help you get noticed out there for those who are looking for leaders just like you as well. Before we wrap up, Sharissa, is there any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for speaking about my podcast. And yeah, if there's anyone who's listening has any questions, please reach out. Even if I'm not, if you're looking for a coach and I'm not the right fit, I will absolutely point you in the right direction. So anything I can do to help, I'm more than happy to do so. And I'm also going to be recommending people to your podcast as well in your community. Jackson, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I just love the work that you're doing and your heart for what you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolutely. And for those who are listening in, if you can like, subscribe, comment, send us your questions. All of that really helps us produce results for those that we're serving. And we'd love to know how we can serve you better. Everybody have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next episode of Vision Pros Live. Bye-bye. Thank you for being here today. I'm really happy that you tuned in to Vision Pros Live. I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions as these episodes continue to move forward. This is going to get more and more fun. We'll have more and more engagement as well. We'll invite people to participate in the show. And thank you for giving us your time and attention. Have an excellent time building out